Hi, my name is Jackson, and I want to talk to you today about can you play Dungeons & Dragons in the setting of Berserk? Berserk is absolutely one of my favorite series, not just talking about manga and anime, but of all fiction of all time. So, can you play it in my favorite game to play with friends and clients for professional DMing, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? Now, I am a huge Berserk fan, so I know there are hardcore Berserk fans out there. I'm going to warn you to say I'm not about to give this a perfect score, because I'm not grading the work itself, I'm grading can you play this in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. On that note, I wanted to make an honorable mention for a role-playing game that I think might fit possibly better than 5th edition D&D. It's a little smaller, it doesn't claim that title of the world's greatest role-playing game. However, if you want to get some gritty action where every sword stroke against your armor matters, where dark things in the woods and shadow come out to feast upon your mortal flesh, check out Symbaroum. You might find it's pretty cool. But let's get right into these stats that I am about to give Berserk. So this is my system to give each setting that I go through in this series a grade out of 100. I have 10 different categories here, each with 10 points. That is going to be concept, what is the elevator pitch for this world that you're going in, exploration, everything about the physical setting that the characters will be walking around in, equipment, a big part of your character sheet, and of course the DM, the items you will be giving out. Magic should always be present somewhere in your D&D world. Backgrounds is still a big part of your character sheet. Lineages or races. Classes are important because they are the main part of what makes your player characters what they are. Content, which is where we will get into some of the actual, ratings information of the work that you're getting into. Maybe not so much for what you want to put in your game, but what your players might recognize if they say, hey, I want to check out this media that you based our game on. Oh no, that's in it. And y'all are already telling that is going to be an interesting section. Monsters are a big deal. Your fights that you're going to have in this setting. And finally, that extra bit of flavor that is on top of the world. It is super important to whatever you're playing in, even in Forgotten Realms. The extra flavor of your world is what gives it the spice worth playing in. Alright, so let's talk about the concept. This is going to be, for Berserk, a 6 out of 10. Bear with me. Berserk looks like a lot of other medieval or sword and sorcery settings. Mercenaries and demons are tried and true, but not that interesting. The specifics, when we start getting into the astral realm, the eclipse, the god hand, Behelits, those are all really cool. Plus, playing in a world that goes all out on gritty violence can be a playable power fantasy that a lot of people, particularly my die-hard Berserk fans out there, would find super cool. So, still a positive score, 6 out of 10 on concept. Exploration. This one is, another 6 out of 10. The world just doesn't jump out at you, at least in those early chapters before we get crazy with the magic and monsters. We don't even have a solid map of the setting. We hear about places like Midland and Tudor and Kushan lands and Vertanis, but we don't actually know where they are in relation to each other. On the bright side, that does mean that the DM has a lot of freedom to make this world very interesting, to add in their own flair. Ask your players what they think Midland means to their character from there, contrasted with the person playing the Bakiraka. There is a lot that you can do, but all that potential means more work for you as the DM and the players, so exploration gets a 6. Equipment. This one is an 11 out of 10. The items are spot on. The magic items have in-universe explanations. This is not just a flaming dagger. This is a flaming dagger that you attune to because the fire spirits, you are calling to them to aid you in combat. The magic item cards practically write themselves. It's so good. This is a setting where firearms are actually present, but not that prevalent or super powerful, which is an issue that I see in other settings or RPGs where you have a crossbow and a firearm, and you're expected for that to actually be an option. It makes perfect sense within the world. Bonus points for the fact that a player can have a disability and have prosthesis, like guts. Come on. There's an emphasis on how fighters use their equipment. That is a super big deal in so many of Guts' fights. Potion of healing is actually present in Berserk. Not as a potion, but Judo walks up and is like, "Hey Guts, I see that you're hurt. That's okay. I have here this little canister of pixie dust." Guys, it's right there. 11 out of 10. Yes, I can do that. It's my video. 11 out of 10. Let's move on. Let's talk about the magic. This one I debated on for a little while. I'm going to give it an 8. Magic and really all of the D&D spells, I think, fit right into the world. Really, especially when you get into the way that our material world merges with the astral world, Cliffoth, and all of the Fey entities ties neatly into the assumed D&D multiverse, but I think in a more succinct way than all of the inner and outer planes of what is considered like canon or standard D&D. Magic is an 8. The only reason it's not like an 10 is because you don't see, readily a cleric and a wizard running around popping off a ton of spells. There's a very low end to magic, and then once you get to characters that can do magic, like Shirke, she is a magical nuke, which is awesome. Magic characters should feel empowered, so should the sword and board fighter. Berserk does that super good. Let's get into the backgrounds. This one, I'm going to give a 10 out of 10. It is a standard fantasy world. We talked about that, but that means that all the backgrounds out of the book are welcome and at home. There is a nice emphasis on nobility versus peasantry, where you were born from and how hard that makes it for you to move on in life is something that is readily discussed in the text of the work, and it doesn't go full Game of Thrones. Not that that's a super bad thing, and maybe I'll do an episode on that. Backgrounds are fully represented and not much to say here. Lineages or races. So this one is going to be the lowest. This is a 4. Guys, humans are 99% of Berserk. I don't think this should come as a huge shock. A player character could possibly be a fairy, half-elf or elf, some kind of fey thing, maybe even take on that Puck or Ivalera role, but these might just fit well as familiars rather than playable characters. Tieflings and Asimars could work, but would come with a lot of baggage as far as explaining, oh, this is how I am a tiefling, this is how my dad was an apostle something, I don't know. There aren't enough cultural differences between the human races, I suppose, to really justify saying like, all of the Kushan are elves and all the people of Chudor are dwarves. Oh my goodness, the Chudor really got to me and almost made me sneeze. So, that being said, don't let it stop you from using some of those other races to better explain your characters. I was making a Guts character sheet on stream, and I actually found that the half-orc stat block worked better for him. You can use that stat block without saying he is a half-orc. It is possible. I am giving this a 4 because a lot of people really like saying I'm some kind of weirdo tiefling, and that's harder to do in the world of Berserk. Moving on. Classes. Big deal. And this one is going to get a 9 out of 10. We actually see analogous examples in the book of Artificer, Barbarian, Fighter, Monk, Ranger, Rogue, Paladin, even. These are straight out of the book. Maybe not with those exact words, but I prefer it that way, to be frank. Things get tricky once you get to Bard, Cleric, Druid, Warlock, Wizard, and Sorcerer, but magic and spells are most definitely present, so your characters can easily package together their abilities and be a wizard in the Berserk world, and it will work totally fine, just not like perfect dead on. It might take some explanation. Moving on. Content of Berserk. So, this is going to be a 5. Berserk has some stuff in it, right? Berserk is heavy. I do not think that is a bad thing. In fact, I prefer heavy media with some content warnings over stuff that is pure light fluff. So please, diehard Berserk fans, don't take this as me saying don't read Berserk. But, you know, there's some stuff in there that isn't for everyone, and if you are bringing that energy to the D&D table, that is something that you should be aware of. Berserk emphasizes violence. It would be really hard, I think, to run a Berserk game without describing the gratuitous bloodshed of your giant sword swing. If the table is down, this is totally awesome. The biggest problem maybe with Berserk is sexual assault is prolific, and even if dealt with in an emotionally mature way at the table, plenty of people won't like it being there. I would take out that element completely, fade to black. And when you get into the nitty-gritty, sacrifice and overall, you know, heavy subject matter are a plus and minus in Berserk. If that is something that your table is down for, really kind of getting into your character and grieving through what the sacrifice of their best friend and someone they looked up to means to them, that can be your best role-playing session ever. But if people are not down, that is going to be a lot to handle. Let's move on and talk about monsters. Y'all, it's another 11 out of 10. You can practically write the stat blocks for how monsters work just from referring to the text. Every fight is laid out in detail. It's great. Giants, dragons, fiends, fae, celestials, monstrosities are all within the pages of Berserk. In good numbers. My favorite thing maybe about the monster section that pushes this from a 10 to 11 is not the awesome demons, it's actually the fact that the human warriors that are all around have distinct fighting styles, and anyone could be bestowed with the gifts of an apostle or a half apostle to give them that extra spell, that extra bonus action in combat that is really interesting. On the 11 out of 10 monsters note, shout out to Real Life Ryan, who actually has a series on the Berserk Monster Manual. Cool channel, also goes to show, yeah, you can absolutely play D&D in Berserk. Moving right on, let's hit flavor. This one, it's a 10 out of 10. I already alluded to this back with the concept of Berserk, that even though the world is pretty standard fantasy, the bigger you get into it, these ideas, the specifics of a Bayolet or an eclipse, it's so good. It is so weighed down with interesting lore that you want to read into, that you want to live in and feel through not only the characters in the book, but maybe a new character that you make in your D&D game. So the deeper elements of what makes the world tick make it interesting to explore and to play with. Characters have awesome fights, and then think about what surviving and struggling means to them, and I think that is a really good blueprint for how to make your games better as well. Alright, y'all, that is all 10 of the categories. That means by the end of everything, Berserk gets an 80 out of 100. That's a B- if we're grading American. If we're grading British, that means you're still first class marks. Yes, absolutely play a game of Berserk. Berserk is a marvelous fantasy world because of its emotional density rather than its breadth of world building like we might see in other places. Be cautious, warn your players of some adult themes if you want to get into it. Get ready for some hardcore action with amazing monster fights. If you have the right group, Berserk could make a great setting for a hardcore game of mercenaries and monsters. Do it, go play it. I already have a Roll20 game of Berserk D&D that I'm just waiting to get some players together for, and I am looking forward to it. That is all I have for this one on Can You Play D&D In. Thank you so much if you took the time to watch my video. I want you to give yourself advantage and have a nat 20 day. Thanks. Bye-bye.